want to just reiterate the importance of your thoughts. This is a listening forum to hear from you as we are interjecting and collecting data from all of you regarding the disability DMV Placard program. Now, our objective of that, some say, well, why are you doing it? Why is CCDA involved in this? The bottom line for us is that we are really the most unique organization within the state of California who can bring collaborative resources together. We don't have any stake in the game. You know, it's like it's not our program, but we can because we're centralized in this topic of disability access. And so we've also been legislated to give research and information back to legislation to help them make better laws. And so what better way to have someone who is currently involved with various folks from various types of backgrounds to collect the data. We also, beyond just legislation, we can also provide it to the programs, because not everything has to be legislated. You can just sometimes just get together within cities, and probably many of you know, you can just get together with organizations. One senator said that to me. He goes, sometimes you just can make a decision and just do it. So we know that information like this can be helpful. So that is our purpose, and we will be collecting as we go throughout the years of this type of forum to do that kind of very thing. So I wanted to start this discussion by giving us some background for some really strong resources, and that is none other than our panelists before us today. So I'd like to introduce you first to Andrew Conway. He's the Deputy Director of DMV Registration Operation Division and operates the Department's Disability Person Parking Placard and License Plate programs. He has participated in a number of national, state, and local efforts directed at improving parking access, particularly for the disability community. He has worked in the field of vehicle registration and related transportation issues for DMV since 1984, when he started answering telephones at DMV field office between classes at the University of Redlands in Redland, California. Let's give a round of applause and welcome Andrew. We have next to him is Council Member Lindsay P. Horthith, she was elected to the West Hollywood City Council in March in 2015. She previously served as a council member for 2 years from 2009 and 2011. Just could not get enough of that, right? And so indeed, we are appreciative of her coming out. She has a long, long history of civic and social justice advocacy. Again, let's put our hands together and welcome Nancy Holden. And next to her, our dear heart, our friend, our partner, is Lilibeth Navarro. She's Executive Director and founder of Community Actively Living Independent and Free. As an organization that was created in the spirit of unity, she has been building collaboration and respect for human dignity and civil rights for all people, with the goal of providing a culturally diverse, independent living center designed to empower the disability community. Thank you and welcome. And on the phone, I hoped I can hear from two representatives, and I'll be confirming that as soon as they say yes, we're here. And that is also our panelist from Senator Jerry Hill's office. That is Patrick Welch. Yes?
Yep, I'm here.
Right, wonderful. And then also Zach Myers-Kren's office of Senator Ben Allen. Yes?
Yes, I'm here as well.
Very good. The two of them are directors for the senators in Sacramento, and as you know, lots of bills are flying around the Capitol right now, so they had to stay at the Capitol, but we are so appreciative that they are on the lines with us to share from their office perspectives. And again, we'll give you a clap and welcome too. So now I'll pass it back to Mindy.
Okay, so we're going to get started with our panel. We first are going to hear from the panelists, and then we'll take questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. He's going to lead us off. Then we're going to go to the phone line, and we're going to hear from the representatives from the senator's office or the legislative staff from the senator's office. And then we'll proceed with Council Member Horvath, and then we'll go to Ms. Navarro. Thank you. Thank you so much for catching that. Are there other VIPs in the room that we need to acknowledge? Okay, thank you so much for capturing that. Andrew?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Again, my name is Andrew Conway. I'm Deputy Director for Registration Operations at the Department of Motor Vehicles, beloved Department of Motor Vehicles. I've operated the Disabled Person Parking Placard program since 2008. Every other year, when we renew all the placards, I try to do something new to make it a little bit better. It's a very challenging program, but the most important part of that program for us is the role that it plays in providing access to the disabled community. If you look at the history of disabled parking privileges and the idea of access, it actually goes back about 100 years in the state of California, when returning World War I veterans were given special parking consideration as the automobile became a more prevalent part of society. In the 1950s, the concept of access was expanded to all disabled members or disabled community members. In 1973, it was recognized that paid parking at the curb or in certain areas wasn't, at the time there was no ADA compliance, but there was a recognition that the disabled community was challenged by parking meters. And in 1973, that's when the parking payment exemption was created in California. In the last few years, and this has been something that was relatively unchallenged for many years. I remember, she mentioned in my bio that I started a little office out east of Los Angeles in the Redlands community, and I remember then parking placards were these cardboard things we just gave to people who generally very simply vouched for. It wasn't a real controversial program, but over about the last 10 to 20 years, we've seen the parking program become more controversial, the parking placard program become more controversial as the state has grown, but our infrastructure around parking has not. And this has created an expense associated with parking that wasn't there before, and it's created a lot of competition for space. And through that, we've seen a lot of concern about fraud in the disabled parking program, and that's been a great deal of concern to us because we consider the people in this community our customers, and we consider this program a very important part. I run a lot of programs for the department: vehicle registration, interstate trucking, motor carrier permitting. The parking placard program is the most important to me because it's the one program I have that provides a vital service to people who desperately need it. To give you a little bit more background on the program and its size, right now we have about 2.4 million customers who have disabled person parking placards, permanent disability. A lot of people think that sounds like a lot, but in a state of nearly 40 million people, that's really less than 15% of the population. Our customers are not drivers. You often hear about, or not always drivers, you often hear the statistic that 1 in 8 drivers has a disabled parking placard in the state. Many of our placards go to people who don't have a driving license. Our placards are issued to children, people in nursing homes, folks who have disabilities that prevent them from driving, a rich diversity of the community, a rich, diverse group of the community has parking placards. We also have about 350,000 of those people who also have special license plates on their car, and we have approximately 5,600 people who have disabled person motorcycle license plates, which is a really interesting community because a lot of people are of the impression that a disabled person cannot ride a motorcycle. And I always like that statistic because it demonstrates a real ignorance of the community about the diversity of the community, about the diverse nature of disability itself. And so I like to point at that program to show people how misunderstood, or how much they might misunderstand about the community. That's about all I want to say at the beginning. I think the only other thing I might say is I know you'll have a lot of questions for me, so a lot of details about how our program operates, maybe a few myths that I could dispel, and certainly a response to the recent state audit that I cooperated with over the last year. I'll hold all that for questions. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on the phone, and Zach too. Sorry we couldn't be down there today. It's just a busy time of the year for us, and it's got a lot of other things going on. So, but I appreciate you including us in this forum, and appreciate hearing from the DMV. So Senator Hill, along with Senator Allen, took recommendations made by the state auditor in their recent state audit, which looked at the DMV's Placard program and found a number of issues that the auditor felt like the legislature could address. And Senator Hill and Senator Ben Allen took those recommendations and turned them into legislation. And I'll just quickly review the 6 points that the bill touches on. It requires the DMV to conduct quarterly audits of applications. It requires the DMV to use a Social Security Administration's Death Master File. It requires all permanent placard holders, but not license plate holders, to renew their placard every 6 years. This doesn't mean someone has to go into the DMV. All this means is that a person has to renew their placard via mail. It does not require recertification of disability. It is simply turning in a form that lets the DMV know what your name is, where you're living, and if you still need the placard. It's a way to keep the program current, to make sure the people who need and use the placards continue to have them, while those who don't do not have them. Fourth, it requires applicants to provide proof of their name and date of birth when they apply for a placard. Fifth, it limits the number of replacement placards that can be obtained within a 2-year period to four placards. And finally, it adds podiatrists to the list of medical providers able to certify an applicants related to disabilities of the foot or ankle. So that's what the bill does. The bill has passed through the Assembly Transportation Committee and is now currently pending a hearing in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and we expect there to be a vote on it in hopefully late August. And after, if it clears the Assembly Appropriations Committee, it would then go to the full Assembly for a vote, and hopefully to the governor for his consideration on the measure. The legislative session ends on September 15th, so the bill has to pass by then, and then the governor has 30 days to either sign or veto bills. So everything will be wrapped up by October 15th. So that's all I got. I don't know, Zach, if you want to add anything, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Hi, this is Zach in Senator Allen's office. Can you hear me? So thanks to Patrick and Angela and everybody who has taken the time out of their day to attend and participate in the forum. Special thanks to our council member from West Hollywood. I look forward to her contributions on the panel and her participation. Senator Allen represents the west part of Los Angeles, and that includes West Hollywood, Santa Monica, and sort of our district, our Senate district, sort of hugs the coast, includes UCLA, LAX, Venice, and goes all the way down to the edge of San Pedro. It's a very diverse district, but it's also a very crowded district, and we have heard very clearly and loudly, well, I'd say more loudly than clearly, from our neighborhood councils about their frustrations with what they perceive to be a abuse of the current placard system, and that has piqued our interest, and we've started to reach out to and have conversations with some of our local governments, and also chose to join Senator Hill as he looks to implement some of the DMV audit recommendations. I think as Patrick pointed out, right now is a very busy time. Once bills get introduced and the sort of bill factory that is Sacramento starts up, there's a lot of churning, and the bills sort of make their way through the various committees, and it can be a difficult process to engage in as a Californian, especially if you don't have a lobbyist or an association that has a representative that's in Sacramento full time. I think that's even harder if you're outside of the Sacramento area, or if you have disability access issues, if you are dealing with those personally, or you're dealing with a community that has those issues. I think that it's incumbent on us to do our best to work in a deliberate and a considerate manner to make sure that we're listening, gathering feedback, and learning from that community as we potentially make any proposed changes to the law as it currently exists. I'm just really here today to listen and learn from all of you. We support certainly what is in Senator Hill's bill, and it's our understanding and belief that there are some other really interesting ideas out there, both ideas about changing the law, but also ideas about how new technology and new partnerships between stakeholders may help to enhance accessibility and while improving and strengthening the program for those who it's truly meant for. So that's the reason why I'm on the call today. I'm here to learn. We don't have anything in front of the legislature at the moment, but we want to be engaged in this process moving forward and participate as we listen to the community that the Commission is already engaged with and has a longstanding relationship with. So thank you for your time, and thanks for letting me introduce myself.
Testing? Okay, thank you, Zach. So thank you guys for hanging on the line till we hear from the rest of the panelists, and then we'll take questions and answers. So Councilmember Horvath, you're up.
Thank you very much. My name is Lindsay Horvath. I'm a council member in the city of West Hollywood, former mayor. I know it's hard to believe that I could be former anything, probably for some of you in the room, but I'm very eager and excited to be here with you today to talk about this very important issue. In the city of West Hollywood, we are so lucky and grateful to be served by our Disabilities Advisory Board, who advises us on a range of issues. And this issue in particular has come to our attention in a variety of ways, not only through our advisory board, but through many members of our community. And I'm also lucky to have one of our extraordinary staff members here, Don Norte, who is the expert at City Hall in dealing with this issue. So if I get it wrong, I know Don will help me get it right. And thank you very much to our senator for his leadership on this issue and being open to having this conversation, because we are seeing that the abuse of disabled parking placard program is extremely high at this point in time in the state of California. And we hear anecdotally from folks on a regular basis about what they're experiencing, but what they're identifying, and as Andrew indicated, some of these contributing factors are intentional to make sure that we're creating accessible communities, which is a priority. But how we regulate and how we make sure that we're empowering accessibility while preventing placard abuse is very important. They're relatively easy to get, especially because they're free. That placard holders are entitled to park at meters for free for an unlimited period of time. And recently, as we've seen with the influx of aging baby boomers, this has led to more placards being in circulation today than 20 years ago. And as a result of the widespread availability of parking placards, parking spaces don't often turn over as often as we need to, and especially in densely populated, congested areas like our city. And people with true mobility issues have to park farther away or are denied access. And in fact, a dear friend of mine experienced this problem and contacted me right away. Her car, she parked she wasn't able to find a designated space, so she parked on the street close to where she needed to go in one of our commercial districts, and it was in a towaway zone, and she left her car there just a little bit after that time started and had her car towed away. And so she had a conversation with the tow company about what their experience was of accessible folks needing accessible spaces and how that related. And so it kind of clued me into this issue and started exploring this conversation a little bit through her experience and how important it is that we make accessible spaces available, but as I said, make sure that that ability isn't being abused. The problem we're facing with the Placard program at the local level is primarily twofold. First and most importantly, it creates a situation where legitimately disabled persons are not able to find parking close to their destination. And second, it diminishes parking revenues that would normally be collected by our city. Obviously, we care a great deal more about accessibility than the parking revenues, but it is one other factor that we take into consideration. In our city, as in many other densely populated urban cities, we have a very limited amount of parking, whether metered or unmetered, and so that's something that we're always monitoring. I'm sure if you've ever been to West Hollywood, you've never had a parking problem, but we work very hard to address those issues. The abuse of the parking placard program results in fewer parking spaces turning over, as I mentioned, and even fewer spots being available for those who need them. And we in our city have a weighted rate of placard usage, which means the combined metered and non-metered spaces of between 23 to 27%, when the average in most cities in California is 15%. So this is something we're experiencing quite frequently. We attribute that to several different things. 25% of our city is age eligible to identify as older adult or a senior, even if they don't identify that way. And so we know that there are some accessibility issues for our population. We also have a large population living with disabilities and living with HIV and AIDS. We routinely see places where people are parked for an extended period of time, and the only recourse our parking enforcement has in these situations is to wait for the driver to return and ask them to provide information that they are entitled to have their parking placard. Obviously, that's not a realistic way to continue to enforce, and it's not realistic use, a good use of anyone's time. We've worked, as I mentioned, with our Disabilities Advisory Board to educate our community about the proper use of the placard program, and so we rely heavily on their help in that regard. Just last night, our city did take the action to support SB 611, which was mentioned earlier, and I'm sure will be discussed in more detail. While we know a number of bills have been introduced in the past, they were flawed in a variety of different ways, and they were unsuccessful proposals for any number of reasons. So we're glad to see SB 611 coming forward as a first step in addressing these issues. Grateful to have this conversation today, and thank you for including me as part of it.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And Ms. Navarro.
Okay. So just this afternoon, I had to change my statistics. Anyway, from a legislative fact sheet, we learned that in California alone, there are 3 million disabled placards in use. But now you say it's 2.5. So while most of these are used responsibly and legitimately, there's still rampant abuse of accessible parking, which results to personal aggravation and which pose a severe challenge to local jurisdictions. Of course, the big picture solution is to correct the system. And in this case, specifically, the DMV, which issues these placards for proper and stricter vetting. But when you are struggling to get out of your van, just to have dinner with a friend, and to have to circle the block a couple of times because a non-disabled person has stolen the only van accessible parking space, you tend to take it personally. Sometimes it makes you feel so angry that you want to immediately do something retaliatory. But then you just let it go, right? Don't you? And just search for another parking space. Chances are, though, and technology is on our side, chances are you have your iPhone or your Android, and if you do, know that indeed you can do something nowadays with your cell phone camera. There is a new app, and I just learned about this weekend. Apparently, it was developed in the East Coast. There's a new app for reporting the violators of accessible parking. And I'm going to give you, if you care to write it down, it's parkingmobility.com. Parkingmobility.com. On accessible parking, we know that our biggest problem is the massive violation of our dedicated spaces. Since we're the ones who intimately know the aggravation, we are empowered by a smartphone app like this to report on violators. It guides you to take a set of photos of the vehicle in violation, and it marks the date, time, and location. And then the app sends the report to the local authorities if the city has approved and adopted the practice of using the app and working with the local government. If you're not sure that your city has adopted the program, get the app anyway, because they collect the information and then they report it to the city. They report it to them and they use your reports as evidence for more advocacy to implement the app and the program in your city. So for Los Angeles and other jurisdictions, we have to do advocacy to make sure that the app is coursed through the City Council in LA and accepted as a way to help monitor and prosecute accessible parking violators. I think in this case, we have to work with the Enforcement Office for Parking Compliance and with the DMV. At any rate, you can check out the website and work with nonprofit organizations like the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. I think they have that. Easter Seals Paralyzed Veterans of America, United Cerebral Palsy, and United Spinal Association. Access to parking is part of the ADA, and we know it's enshrined there, and we should continually push for stronger enforcement. So as a consumer, I don't drive, but I'm always a passenger. I use a couple of tools. California.gov provides an excellent guideline for everything about accessible parking. For our business partners, there is LawyersAgainstLawsuitAbuse.com. Again, LawyersAgainstLawsuitAbuse.com has a very useful 4-page primer on California parking spaces, which specifies the guidelines on disabled parking enforcement. Cal Chamber also has a nice tool there. And I have only 3 minutes, but we also have tried a couple of bills, right? So we had AB 2602, Mike Gatto, I think, enshrined in that bill. We're requiring people to reapply for placards instead of having the auto renewal, requiring that when somebody dies, you return the placard within 60 days, and allowing the local jurisdictions to charge, I'm not sure about this one, I think it's been tried in San Francisco, but charging, for those parking spaces. SB 611 is something that we've already discussed. Hill and Allen provides for better ID requirements, a random quarterly audit of the applications, which is good, and the others. So when the promise of ADA is thwarted by one as simple as the ability to get a parking space to pursue one's business, whether it is a personal affront, whether intentional or just out of ignorance. The parking lot then becomes the field of battle instead of it being the first step to an accessible world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that information, and we'd love to get it from you so we can make sure it's captured in our summary. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to take questions and answers in the room first. Then we're going to go to Alex, who's doing the webinar, and then we're going to take them from Gabrielle, who's moderating on the phone. All right, so I see hands up already. So again, share the air, keep it lean, and if you would state your name before you speak and your organization, and then chime in. We'll bring it to you. 1 second.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Hendler-Goldman, and I've been attending CCDA meetings as a public, and I'm here to listen to what DMV, the changes, the new laws, and I support all that's going on in this room. I invited Officer O'Day, who is in that division, because I thought that it would be important for him to give us feedback because he's in the field and he sees it firsthand what we're all talking about. And I would love for him to get up and let us know what he sees that can be helpful for us to have dialogue.
So let's take this question that we have. Ma'am, if you'd introduce yourself, and I'll come over and check in with you guys.
Thank you. I didn't want to infringe upon if the officer is prepared to speak. I'll wait my turn, or if you don't want to, are you off? I'm not sure. I don't want to infringe on that time. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Ruthie Goldkorn, No Barriers, Disabled Access Consulting and Advocacy Services. I serve on the Executive Committee, the Legislative Committee, and the lead legislation negotiating team for Californians for Disability Rights. And we worked very, very closely with Patrick and members of DMV and with Disability Rights California on hammering out a much better bill. SB 611 started out in one form and has become a bill that is acceptable and is not going to infringe upon the disability community. We have been, our mantra for decades in the disability community and the disability advocacy community has always been nothing about us without us. We were not treated with respect. We were not included in conversations. We were not included in legislation. We were told this is the way it is. We have made tremendous strides in the last 25 years. The ADA turns 27 next week. And we now have what I have coined as a new mantra, and Lilibeth, I know you know that, and Myrna, I know you know that, John, I know you know that. The mantra that we have is that we are not the problem, we have a problem, and we want to help solve the problem. There is nothing that is statistically evident that people with disabilities are being forced out of parking spaces by fraudulent use of placards. The DMV sampling indicated that the applications had a problem, which is why DMV is going to solve their problem, and we are more than happy to help them solve their problem. We have a tremendous number of issues regarding the lack of availability of parking. The City of Los Angeles suspended painting blue curbs in residential areas for people in front of their own homes. That program is coming back. We do not have fully accessible on-street parking. We do not have mid-block curb cuts. We do not have accessible public rights-of-way, the sidewalk. Therefore, we're not going to pay our fair share. We are not going to pay meters. We are not going to do that. We will help you. You obey the law, and that's going to help tremendously. And the placard, quote-unquote, abuse problem is mired in urban legend. Yes, there are facts. Yes, there are people who take Granny's placard. We understand that. But the enforcement is lacking. It is all about local enforcement.
Thank
And
you.
the parking mobility program that Lilibeth's talking about, it's out of Texas.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. So we have Officer, is it O'Day? O'Day, thank you so much for joining us. He's going to take a couple minutes and share some information with us, and it seems like he has some very valuable information, so we're going to see about having him speak maybe as a panelist during our next listening session. We'll be in discussion about having law enforcement representation. So thank you.
You're welcome. My name is Officer O'Day. I'm with Los Angeles Police Department. I assigned West Traffic Division. I'm the department's subject matter expert on DMV placard fraud. I got into this about 32 years ago. My grandmother lost her leg, came to me at a Christmas party and wanted to know why police don't do anything to enforce handicap laws. And back then we were dealing with drive-by shootings and gang violence, and that was our priority. But I gave it some thought, and I never really thought about it. She told me that she would have to park at the far end of the parking lot because every time she tried to get a spot, it was always taken. Similar to the panel members at the front of the room, her experience driving around the block in her van. Needless to say, I started looking into it. I started paying attention to handicap stalls, and I was amazed at just how much abuse there was. So I started writing tickets. I was assigned permanently the department's enforcement because there was no enforcement in the city at all. DOT, LEPD, nothing. So I was assigned as a permanent enforcement officer in 2006. So for over 10 years, I've been doing this every day. I spend all day long in the parking lots. I meet tens of thousands of disabled people. Actually, I should say tens of thousands of not disabled people. And I have written tens of thousands of citations, confiscated thousands of placards. I see people that have placards that shouldn't. I see people that are using other people's placards. I see counterfeit placards, altered placards, just about every type of abuse you can imagine. I've noticed that we're all used to road rage on freeways. We're starting to get parking lot rage. The general public is becoming increasingly outraged at the amount of abuse, and they're starting to become confrontational. So I'm getting pulled into a lot of these controversies to try and keep the peace between the people who feel that these spots are being abused. I can offer insight as to the type of abuse that there is, the frequency of it, and I've got some ideas of my own, but they're just my personal ideas. But if it helps all of you in finding solutions, I'd be willing to share all that. I think we're all disabled. I mean, I've suffered a traumatic brain injury. I've had shoulder surgery, 2 knee surgeries, C-spine injury, lower lumbar injury. Some days I can't get out of bed, but I don't have a placard. I think really what we need to tackle, or what this quorum needs to tackle, is while we all may be disabled to some extent, we need to really define what disability, at what level of disability do you really need a placard? Because as it stands right now, so many people have placards that are far more mobile than other people who really need the spot and can't use it because the people who are more mobile can't park. So if I can help, let me know. I'll give you my insight.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing your comments when we break into the table sessions. So we have one speaker over here, and then I'll come over to you.
We just want to just real briefly state that part of the reason why we have you all in round tables is so you can have intimate dialogues on these kind of levels of discussion. So do know we're trying to create that space for you to talk, but we do have some folks on the phone that won't be able to do that, and so we want to quickly get to those folks who are on the phone. But we have 2 hands, and then we'll go to the phones.
Do you have any statistical information on disability placard other than anecdotal information, and what care has been taken in this policy to address people who may need it, but whose disabilities may not be easily visible? So people often assume somebody's abusing it, but they're not. It's just not a disability people are recognizing.
We don't have too much data on just why different disabilities are, what disabilities are represented in the community, I guess, as if that's what your question, what types of disabilities or?
Abuse.
Okay.
Not somebody just parked. I'm sorry.
I understand your
People who's
question.
getting a placard that shouldn't, other than.
So I don't have extreme data on it, but if you look at the news media reports that we put out when we do placard stings, we typically find that most people that we're watching, we don't even bother to contact. The disability is readily apparent. A person, walking up with an agitated gait or in a wheelchair or on crutches, approaching a vehicle, we're not going to contact that person. And so that's going to skew the statistic to some extent. Our investigators approach a vehicle when watching someone walk up to it, they don't see an apparent disability. And so then they query the person as to whether or not they have the identification card we issue to that placard. We find that anywhere between, I think, 15 to 30%, depending on the community we go to, of the people they contact, there might be a problem. And that's after the vast majority of the placard observers they see, they don't even bother to contact because disability is readily apparent. So that kind of tells you that it's a pretty small segment of the use of placards on the road. The other thing that I'm sorry, was that for me? Oh, my trainer at the gym has one of those things. I get to stop when it goes off. But so that's the best we can do at this point. We also know that looking statistically, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the number of placards that are in circulation and the number of people that we estimate have qualifying disabilities from medical research, from the census, tells us these numbers are in line with each other. It's pretty obvious to us that the problem, if there's a problem in an area, is people who borrow a placard that was legitimately issued. And there's really no way to quantify that. There are people who say it's a big problem, and there are other people who say it's an urban legend. And I think that which answer it is probably dependent on the level of demand and the price of parking in that community.
Testimony on this topic yesterday as we were considering whether to support SB 611, and one of the members of the public shared that there were, if I get the numbers right, 8,000 people who are living over the age of 100 who have, and yet there are in the state, and yet there are 10,000 placards that have been issued. So there's a 2,000 differential.
It's actually 28,000.
Okay, so there's clearly an
It's
even
even more.
larger differential. So I'm glad to get the real number here, but that statistic stuck with me when it was mentioned last night, because that seems to be one of the easiest areas to target for enforcement and getting those placards out of circulation. Oh, once people pass away, that their placards should no longer be in circulation.
Okay, we're going to take one more comment in the room, and then we're going to go to our remote call-in. Did you want to say something, Commissioner Loomis?
I thought it was question time, so I'm going to ask a question.
Sure.
So comments we can do at the table, but we have this great panel, and I have a question. Particularly in the greater Los Angeles area, for me, includes West Hollywood and Hollywood. I've had a disabled placard since I was 18 years old. I have spinal fusion and a neuromuscular disorder. You can't see any of that. So I've also had the experience of have people inappropriately ask me whether I'm disabled or not. Depends what day it is if you're going to be able to see an agitated gait or not. It's not something that I feign. So I would take umbrage at a police targeting me with how I walk. I think that sends the wrong message, particularly for those who have invisible disabilities. But my question related to that is, have we somehow lost the forest for the trees? We had something called, and we have something called, all that money that goes into those beautiful meters and adds up in the greater city of Los Angeles was used for many centers of parking. They're called malls. Highland in Hollywood, controversially, was one of them. In fact, the Grove, a number of places, you know, where you get to park for $2. Well, by the way, that's where that money came from that subsidized that private parking. And it's been the bane of my existence because of the following. The cities have not been able to commit their promise of what the ADA says for accessibility for parking, disabled parking. That was a key opportunity to expand parking. Instead, it went the way of big money. And so what are we doing as local and a big city and an affluent city? Let's put it that way. West Hollywood's small, but it's affluent. What are we doing when we're really talking about the parking issue and we're talking about limited resources? And that's a huge resource, by the way. What are we doing to possibly repurpose that money for actual parking that would also allow us to increase disability parking on the streets and other places, because there's still far and few in between? That's my question. Is that coming up in the conversation? Because I feel like it's a big piece of the story that no one's talking about.
I'm happy to talk about West Hollywood. We use the parking revenue that comes into our city for a variety in a variety of ways. One of the things that we've been doing recently is we regularly study how often our handicap spaces are filled and the availability of parking spaces that are available in the community, because parking is at such a deficit to start out with. We have, even especially in our residential areas, there are homes that people have been living in for a long period of time that are rent stabilized but don't have parking spots. So we're dealing with a myriad of parking challenges in the city. So we're trying to use the resources that we have to make sure we're staying on top of those, staying on top of our numbers, that we're creating more parking spaces, and always mindful of that, especially as new development comes into the community, that it is an opportunity for us to create more spaces. But we're also looking for new ways to address our parking deficit, recognizing that you can't just build parking everywhere. And we're working with new technology to actually create new parking opportunities, and some of our revenue will go towards that.
Question, and his hand's been up for a bit, so we're going to take him. And I'm sorry? Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, just a thought. When they passed the ADA, that was what, 27 years ago? They chose a number, you know, to a given number that should be accessible. But that was many years ago, before the society has opened up, you know, avenues for us to participate. So maybe there's a way we could reauthorize or, you know, upgrade the law to accommodate the mainstreaming of people. Because now, with so many other options for transit, we're out there, and we know we need those spaces. 25 spaces is little. I mean, 2 spaces for 25 slots is too little. So I think it has to be a push for a dynamic number, a number that develops through time, because we're a very dynamic people, and we're out there to infinity and beyond.
Hi, I'm Don Norte from the City of West Hollywood. I've been working with the state California Public Parking Association for a number of years, and as well as the governor's office. And one of the things that we've liked we would like to have considered in the future with legislation and accessibility to disabled spaces is the new concept of the virtual permit. A lot of cities are going in the way of virtual permits for their permit parking programs, their residential permit parking programs. It's something that the city is going to look into. We would recommend that the state also look into the new technologies that would be available for that, because there are inherent problems with the administration of the enforcement of the placards. Just in regard to the distribution alone, there is also the administrative factor of people who unintentionally forget to hang their placards, and they have to go through the hassle of contesting the citation and getting it dismissed. So in the future, I'd like there to be closer collaboration to the businesses and the companies coming forward with new technologies to enable us to use virtual permits. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Patrick, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, just back. Someone had a question about the looking at using parking revenues, and I just wanted to say that that's not something that we have analyzed in the process of SB 611. We have been specifically looking at the recommendations that the auditor made and proposing those to the legislature. So we have not taken that broader view of the issue, but it sounds like something that is definitely worthwhile to look at.
Thank you. So now we're going to go to the webinar. Alex, do you want to bring in the comments or questions you have from that line?
Yeah. Hi, Mindy. Can you hear me? So I have a comment that was emailed in from Irvin Schiffman. And Irvin says, unfortunately, I am unable to attend the discussion. However, I would like to offer my opinion. There is no doubt in my mind that there is considerable abuse of the placards frequently by people who have very little, if anything, wrong with them physically. It is a difficult and nearly impossible fix. Perhaps it should be highly publicized that there is ongoing monitoring of handicap placards and that anyone determined to be using a placard erroneously will be fined $1,000 and the placard will be permanently confiscated with no opportunity for renewal, regardless of who it belongs to. That may discourage people from using them falsely, and over time, the numbers may change. Just as doctors are cautioned against prescribing dangerous drugs, they should also be made aware of the seriousness of furnishing a patient with a letter to obtain a handicap placard.
Did you have any other comments or questions?
I have one more comment from Jeff Moss, but I believe that Jeff is also in the queue to speak on the phone. So I'm going to wait, and if we don't get to Jeff's comment, then I will read it out.
Gabrielle, how many folks do we have with questions?
On the phone line, we have 4 questions.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and proceed.
Thank you. First, we will hear from Marilyn Golden. Marilyn, your line is open.
Thank you. I'm with the Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund. I want to thank all of you for this session and for all of the advocacy as well as good faith effort that has gone into making it fully accessible. This is clearly not just the beginning of a process, but in some ways the end or the middle, but a lot has been done until now. I want to also thank the elected official from West Hollywood and also Lily Beth Navarro and to the law enforcement people for their remarks. I want to especially thank California Disability Advocates who got SB 611 into shape. Representing our organization, which defends disability rights by people with all kinds of disabilities, focusing on agency action against abuse is something that I would hope we can all certainly support, just as with increased local law enforcement. And I have the impression perhaps there had been earlier provisions that weren't as supportable by the disability community. So I want to appreciate the work that has already gone into making that bill in the acceptable form that it is today. I think the growing body of statistical information that we've heard discussed today suggests to me that we are finally moving into a place in our state at this point that we are finally getting to the point of getting a handle on this issue, getting our arms around this issue, and that's a good thing. I am very glad to hear discussion of taking advantage of all opportunities to increase access to parking, particularly given that as we baby boomers grow older, I think our society is going to experience a greater demand for accessible parking. It's great to bring together a lot of different sectors to solve problems and continue to guarantee access. There are other localities that are not California. There are other parties, sometimes even here, although not lately, I don't think, that, are really suggesting much more problematic changes that appear to solve a problem while making things harder rather than more accessible for the disability community. I don't know how many anecdotes, I wanted to say this and then be done. I don't know how many anecdotes of individuals we've heard today, although some. I know that a member of our board who uses a wheelchair but who is an attorney and spent most of her life working hard to use her mobility was via using ambulatory mobility assistance, and she has made us aware, if we were not already aware, that without California's guarantees and our whole approach and system for parking, she could have never gotten through law school. She could have never taken competitive employment. She could have never given back the extraordinary amount of service she's given to the disability community and to the general community. I don't want to mention her name because I don't know that she's here to make the remarks herself. But we have a very up close and personal story of the difference it makes in people's lives to have these kinds of supports. And so everyone who works to keep them, we want you to know that you're doing something very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And we just want to ask our remote participants if they could keep it to no longer than 2 minutes so we make sure everybody has time to share. So we'll take the next person, please. Thank you. And if you hear that's just a signal.
And next we'll hear from Jeff Moss. Jeff, your line is now open.
Hi, everybody. I live over in the UCLA area, and we face a unique problem. While I understand this is a statewide problem with the placard abuse, I just wanted to talk a minute about the abuse that we're facing over by UCLA. UCLA charges for parking on campus for faculty, employees, and students. Our neighborhood that surrounds the campus is preferential parking, which means you can only park in the neighborhood if, one, you have a parking permit, or two, you're exempt from a parking permit if you have a handicap placard. So our neighborhood, which is a relatively quiet neighborhood, during school days is plagued with UCLA students using disabled placards. It's not uncommon to have 20 to 75 cars line the streets with disabled placards. These students, some probably do have disabilities, but the majority of the students, and Officer O'Day can testify to this because he's arrested several UCLA students, including football players from the UCLA football team, misusing placards in the neighborhood. So we have students using blue placards that most of the time don't belong to them. And then we have an issue of students using the red temporary placards where they have found a doctor who will write them a prescription for a temporary placard. And then when that placard expires, the student goes back to that doctor, pays the office visit, and the doctor then writes a new script for another placard. We also found out that there's a lot of students downloading the DMV forms off the internet, writing in a doctor's license number, going to Automobile Club, and then getting a disabled placard from themselves. Another issue we're facing is UCLA employees parking in Westwood, taking up all the metered spaces in Westwood so they don't have to pay for parking on campus. So I just kind of wanted to take a moment and share the frustration that we see over in our side of the city of the rampant abuse. Granted, there's probably people out there who are legitimately disabled and need a placard, but the majority of the people using the placards around here are healthy 20 to 30-year-old UCLA students that absolutely do not need placards.
We'll take the
We'll hear from Angel Gonzalez. Your line is open.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for putting on this forum. I think it's very informative. I work for the Alameda County General Services Agency in Northern California, and we have lots of placard abuse here with our own employees who borrow grandmas, moms, dads placards so they can park for free in our parking facilities. I'm wondering if perhaps, one, we get rid of the free parking for these handicap placards. That might stop some of the abuse. Two is that maybe there be a tier program as to the severity of a disability. So maybe red means you're extremely disabled and you get the priority spaces, or do something of that nature. I've heard some other states doing that. But it is a real prevalent problem all over the place. And I manage parking facilities for the county. And I have several people who say they have disabled placards and they want that free parking because they don't want to pay for the parking fees. But thank you for putting this forum on, and I look forward to many more sessions of this. Thank you.
Did we have any other comments on the phone?
We have one remaining, coming from Lisa Hayes. Lisa, you're open.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, want to thank everyone for this. Is such a great topic, extremely important, especially personally to me. I am a wheelchair user. I did want to talk about a couple of things, mostly comments instead of questions. One is I wanted to talk about word usage. There's a lot of words that are being used, and words are very important. And we hear the word handicapped a lot. And if you think about that word's origin comes from hand in cap or beggars. I personally take offense to it, and I know there's a lot of people in the disability community that do as well. It's very disempowering. So if we could use empowering words like I am a person with a disability, that would be really awesome. But I do want to express my deep thanks to the law enforcement that do enforce placard misuse, because it is prevalent. I think there's some solutions that people aren't thinking of or that people can think of in terms of I need wider spaces. When I open my car door, I have to have space to get my chair out. I wouldn't be opposed to having spaces at the end of a parking lot. We're facing a time where, older adults people are aging into disability, and we've got a lot more people as the baby boomers age that are going to need access to closer spaces. Let's think about some alternatives. I have very strong arms and can push farther. I know a lot of power chair users that wouldn't mind a little further distance, but we need the space. We risk banging people's cars, and I've gotten people angry with me because I've done that because there was no other space available. But let's think of if we could get a little bit creative. I think that would be really cool. Just so that we can, for us chair users who really, really need that space. Let's try to be a little bit more creative in terms of what else, other things that we can do. But thank you for the time to listen, and this is really great stuff.
Thank you. So now we're going to take one more comment from the room, and then we'll go into our small group session. As was mentioned earlier, we're fortunate enough to have one of the LA County Commissioners for the Commission on Disabilities with us. So Commissioner Benavides, if you would share your remarks with us, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank Betty Wilson and also Betty for having me here. My name is Carlos Benavides. I am president of the Los Angeles County Commission. I have a lot of respect for Mr. O'Day. Problem is we don't have enough officers that will enforce it like he does. As far as an app, that's not a good idea, because what's going to happen with an app, if you don't have a telephone, a lot of people that are disabled are not app friendly. So even if I complained about it during that hour and a half or 2 that I'm waiting to get into my car, there's nothing going to be done about it. And then who's to say when the officer goes to check that car, somebody that's disabled will say, hey, well, you know what, I was there. Okay, those are some of the trials that I see. But my main thing is, you know what? We're looking at things as a disability. We're looking at today. You know what? Today doesn't matter. Yesterday doesn't matter. What we have to do is fix the problem from here on in. Even if it means, you know what, changing the color on a placard, which might be expensive at one time, but it's a one-time fix for people that do permanently need it, okay? I drive a van. I'm a C2, a T1 tetraplegic, okay? And I've been there where I've had to sit and wait 2.5 hours because somebody with a temporary disabled placard parked on the line, so I couldn't get my van down. So it's not only educate people that are not disabled or people that have bad placards, it's people that are disabled we have to educate also. So it goes both sides. And I was telling somebody else today, I only see 2 kinds of people in the world. I don't look at color, I don't look at race, I don't look at gender. I look at there's one type is disability, they're disabled. The second are TABs, okay, TABs. And all TABs are just temporarily able-bodied because either by age, an illness, an accident, shooting, they're gonna end up where I'm at. And by the time they get there, I wanna make sure that it's a lot easier for them to exist from there. So instead of complaining and arguing and saying, you know what, hey, I need this and I need that, we should all come together and figure out how we're gonna work at what everybody needs. Disability is disability. Doesn't matter if you're in a chair, it doesn't matter. If you can't see it, hey, if they have breathing problems, brain, stroke, injury, you put handicap spots in the middle of the block, great. Okay, but you gotta remember, that's not gonna change how many illegal placards are out there, and anybody with a placard can park in that spot. Just because it's in front of your house, it doesn't belong to you. So those are some of the things that we're gonna have that I think that this commission should come up with and decide. Okay, thank you very much.
So I want to quickly go through what we're going to do for this portion so that we can spend the most of the time having you guys have your discussion and we can capture that and then hear from you. The first thing is we've got our materials here, and I mentioned before that there's this page, Guidelines Working in Groups. So like I said, we're having 2 small breakout groups, and then in between each one or after each one, we're going to harvest from your table the highlights of your discussion. So the first thing we'd like you to do when you come to your tables is introduce yourselves. The second thing is we'd like you to determine who's going to take what task. On this sheet are 4 tasks. One is the facilitator. One of the CCDA commissioners will serve as a facilitator. You just need to decide which one. Then if we have somebody who'd volunteer to be a note taker, that would be great. Then we'd like somebody to be the reporter who's going to report out when we do our large group discussion. And then if somebody could keep time, that will help the group with their tasks. Any questions on the tasks? Okay, great. So then, after you've introduced yourself, decided who's going to take which task, we'd like to ask folks if they would take a few minutes to jot down your ideas in response to the questions. The first question we're working on is what works and what does not work in the DMV Disabled Parking Placard Program. So you'd use that page to jot down your comments. If you need room on the back, go ahead and do that. If you want to leave these with us at the end of the day, we'd be happy to take them. And then you can move into group discussion. So we'd like you to take about 10-15 minutes to have your discussion, and then I will give a sign at 5 minutes, and then if you would decide what you want to report out for your small group conversation, that would be ideal. So let me just run through it one more time quickly. First, go ahead and introduce yourselves, pick your tasks, decide who's going to serve which task, then take a few minutes to jot down your own remarks, then go into group discussion, and then before you end, please gather what you'd like to say for the report out. We're just looking for the highlights. Each group will have about 1 minute, 1 minute and a half to report out.
Okay, Brian Holloway. Well, we number one issue for us was enforcement. Lack of enforcement is the number one problem at our table. We also felt that we could use more cell phones to report people who are parked in a disabled parking stall with no placard at all. That would be an option to report those in. We believe that the percentage of disabled parking spaces, whether it's on street or in parking lots, too fast, too loud? The ability to use cell phone cameras to report in disabled spaces with no placard.
Right.
Okay, third one is we believe that the required number of disabled spaces is outdated in comparison to the population, especially the population of disabled. We should consider using temporary disabled spaces where you have an event that is more popular than normal. So you could add temporary disabled spaces to an event. We also heard that there's, in many cities and in downtowns, there's far too many yellow loading zones that are sitting empty as opposed to the shortage of blue handicap spaces, especially on street. We also suggested DMV should not send renewed placards to old mailing addresses when there's been a change of address. And we all like the renewal, the periodic renewal of placards, that every so years you have to reapply or re-notify and re-identify your need for a placard, rather than it being just mailed out every 4 years.
Great. And are all those on your sheet? Great, because we'll be collecting that. Who would like to go next? Table 2.
Hi. Our table found very little that we can contribute to the working column. So we have on the issues that the placard doesn't work in is the lack of understanding with the different types of spaces, the van accessible spaces versus the standard. The number of spaces that are allocated to the van accessible as opposed to regular standard spaces, we don't think are being looked at. We also have concerned about the enforcement as well, that a need for different types of parking accessibility, such as the possibility of doing valet parking at public sites, such as cities and hospitals. There's also a need to get sharing of data, better investigations at DMV. Need for increased dialogue with the medical community on placard issuance and the investigation of licensing and fraud. And that's it.
Thank you. So we thought that a couple of things that we're working about the program is it gives people with disabilities options for parking. We recognize that there wasn't enough, there isn't enough accessible parking out there, and so that would be a solution. Also that there's value in just having one agency do this, and so there's opportunity for the Department of Motor Vehicles to do a better job monitoring how people use them. We also thought that there's a lot of discussion about a problem that we don't, there's no comprehensive study that says what the problem is. And it was brought up in our area, where is most of the complaints coming from? It's where there's not enough parking. So you're going to pit, you're going to go attack this one group because there's not enough parking for anybody. And so that would be a solution to those problems in that area is to create more parking. So that there needs to be a more comprehensive study on what the issues are and what the accessible parking needs of people are, because we recognize that there's not enough parking. Also, that when planning is being done, that the needs for cars are taken into consideration. That's. Did I miss anything? Need for more parking.
Great, thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause, thank you.
More table.
And we've got table 4 that's next.
Thank you. I'm going to try not to repeat some of the themes that have already been covered. I'd say we had some internal, not disagreement, but a lot of hearty discussion on some issues where people had some different perspectives, in particular, availability versus accessibility. Do we need more availability of parking in general, or do we just need more accessible parking? And there were some conflicting views on that issue. In addition, we focused on, we had some discussion as to whether or not a 2-tier system is appropriate, whether there should be charging for certain levels of disabled accessibility for long-term placards, and some disagreement on that issue. There was general agreement about the misuse of parking, the overissuance of placards after the death of a disabled owner, even despite requests to stop the issuance, issuance of replacement placards, which suggested abuse. We had some discussions over whether or not members of the community should be indirectly penalized and potentially create additional barriers, or whether that was helpful to curtail some of the abuse. We also discussed whether we need to assess who is truly disabled to try and cut down on the abuse. Some of the suggestions were using end spots and putting disabled parking for vans to park on the end as a cost-efficient and effective method of creating additional disabled parking. We also discussed a New Mexico model where doctors are fined for writing fraudulent prescriptions. One theme that seemed overarching here was that we need, in coming up with new policies, we need practical input from various members of the different communities. We need input from DOT. We need input from law enforcement. We can't just have a very small select group of individuals spearheading these initiatives, but we really have to get input from the field and from the folks who are actually experiencing it on the enforcement side as well as the user access side.
Thank you so much. So we've heard some great comments. I would love to summarize, but I'm not going to do that now because I want to give you guys more time for your discussion. What we're going to do is we're going to have folks go into the next question, which is, what are your recommendations? I know we gathered some, so we're going to shorten this part of the session. What other recommendations do you have that will strengthen the program while maintaining accessibility? As you know, when you change things, there are unintended consequences. So we want to think about how to mitigate those unintended consequences and what recommendations will strengthen the program. So if you turn your attention to that question, and then what we'll do is we'll take report outs at 1 minute a table. So if my reporters can raise their hand, that'd be great. All right, and at this table, same person. Okay, who'd like to go first? All right, we'll start this time at table 4, then we'll go to table 3. Who would like to go next? We'll just identify that right now. Okay, then I'll pick table 1 and then table 2. All right, table 4, take it away. Table 4, take it away.
Actual penalty of being caught with an illegitimate or fraudulent placard. And we discussed the fact that those fines can be anywhere from $700 to $1,500 plus some impound fees, but the street value of placards can far exceed that. We also discussed the need for increased consistency in enforcement and that we simply need more numbers. We need more Officer O'Days out there who know the proper approach to handling this, who have the training. And then we discussed improved communication. We need education of the public, and we also need education of the DMV. There's a lot of concern that the DMV representatives making policy decisions aren't necessarily fully educated in what's going on in the field and need input both from the disabled community, but also they need information from law enforcement that's out there handling this on a daily basis. Law enforcement needs a seat at the table. So our focus was really on communication and consistency.
Much. So we'll go ahead and go on to table 3.
One was pass SB 611. Just do it. Number 2 would be ask the Building Standards Commission and the state architect to scope increasing the amount of on and off street disabled parking that's required in the future. Convert some loading zones to disabled zones. Raise the state penalty or fine on disabled parking offenders. Penalize the borrower of the placard, not the legal holder. And again, enforcement's number 1, and hire more people to do enforcement.
Great, thank you so much.
We said to start building community parking. We need more parking for everyone. This is creating a false narrative, in our opinion, that this is the problem. The problem is there's not enough parking for anyone, and we are kind of being myopic in our viewpoint. More public transportation options. Make public transportation more attractive. Better education on how to use public transportation and how to use the disabled rate. Some people with disabilities are paying. If you go on the MetroLink, there is a disabled rate. So it's not necessarily the case that people with disabilities don't ever pay for public transportation. It depends, and there's more of an ability for a sliding scale in that case. Some people are free, some people can pay a discounted amount. Explore utilizing parking co-ops to let residents use commercial parking after hours. Hollywood Highland, the Grove, Americana, if they built it with public funds, public should be able to use it. Look at where parking money goes from the meters. Follow the money. Because there's more money coming in, where is that money going? And so if we don't pay attention, things are being done that may not be facilitating creating more universal parking for everyone, and not just affluent communities. Return placards of deceased persons more easily. There's numbers of people, we talked about at the table, and I had the same problem returning my grandparents' placard. And it's very difficult to get an answer on where to do it, how to do it. And perhaps maybe if we get to a point where for those who are using technology, and the baby boomers are using technology, that maybe there's a way where you simply can put, instead of that little white flimsy card that you get saying you have a disabled placard, why don't you put it on the ID or on the driver's license, and you can turn it off when the person is deceased and make it a little easier if there's this great concern that all these deceased people's placards are in the. And once again, I'm being facetious because that's still an assumption being made. But to the extent that that might be happening, seems like that could be an easy fix. Voters should hold officials accountable for how they're using parking monies. And we simply need to try to add more parking spaces throughout the community, not just solely focusing on affluent communities.
Thank you so much. That was great. So table 2.
Most of the comments that we've had at our table echoed those stated, with the exception of we are looking towards better awareness, public information, engagement of the disabled community and elected officials on solving this problem. better awareness in terms of the rights of the disabled to do things, to take advantage of the vehicle code provision to allow for one vehicle to occupy 2 spaces in a facility if there are no dedicated spaces available. There also is a recommendation to hold cities more accountable for the adequate supply of inventory for disabled, both on-street and off-street, and finally, greater penalties for fraudulent placards versus misuse. There isn't really any distinction between somebody who produces a fraudulent placard or a counterfeit placard that is made with, laminating something with a color copier versus somebody who forgets to put their placard up or is using it in a wrong time. So those are the things that we'd like to see more of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One of the things that has come out is that we didn't spend as much time talking about DMV's response to the audit that occurred. And so some of your comments reflect the possibility of not having some of that information. And so we really do want to make sure that our listening forums are informative. And so I want to give Andrew a little bit of that time to share some of that as well.
I need to get some notes out.
Okay.
Because it's a lot.
Oh. Okay. And so, well, Andrew, I know, because he's been doing this since he was a child with DMV, but we do want to encourage everyone. We have it on our website, the link to the audit, and so as you look getting it out, I do want to make sure that that we, just give a few highlights, because I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. Some of you are probably connected to transportational times. So, Andrew.
Thanks. So, I try to be a cheerleader for this program. It's natural. It's my baby. I really do care deeply about it. And the first thing that I'm committed to is providing access. That's what I do. I give out placards to people who meet the qualifications under the law. Much of what we do today is actually a settlement to a 1993 ADA case. So it's ironic. I realize the program doesn't meet a lot of people's needs today, but it actually was born out of an ADA lawsuit settlement. And so I think it's probably time for an update. I think we've all probably learned. So we were very agreeable to much of what the auditors said. We quibbled about some of their findings here or there. Is it really this or that? But in large part, their recommendations are things we fully agree with. And we like that their recommendations were cut into 2 pieces. One was a set of recommendations that I could implement to improve the program, and the other was a set of recommendations for the legislature, because much of what we do is not DMV policy, it's bound by statute, and that has to be changed for us to get anywhere. So I just wanted to go briefly through some of the audit findings and let you know what DMV has committed to doing. This audit was only released in April, and over the next couple of years, we have a lot of plans. The first thing that the auditors recommended was that we work with the medical boards, medical licensing boards, to improve physician training, to improve the oversight of those people, and to check the validity of applications. And so we are entering into interagency agreements with all the medical licensing boards related to the Placard program, and we are going to, on a quarterly basis, audit the program. We're going to receive signature cards from all the boards to compare their signatures to samples. We're going to publish information and guidelines for doctors, physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, certified midwives, to let them know what our standards are, what's in the law, and what we need their cooperation for and what to look for. And then lastly, we're going to work with them to identify medical experts who can review applications that we've received on a sample basis and give us feedback on whether or not those are quality applications. So those are things that we committed to do to that finding. The other finding, that the second item that they had was, where is number 2? Was that we need to improve our training of our staff. and that we needed to make sure that our staff better police the program up front. So right now, on Friday, I actually reviewed the recommendations of my staff for putting out new policy and procedures this fall. The other thing we're doing is we're going statewide to all 9,000 of our employees with a training video that's going to sort of walk them through an application and walk them through a couple of suspicious applications and give them feedback. We're also going to use our Disabled Advisory Committee at the department to have representatives of the community talk at the beginning of the video to instill a sense of purpose and responsibility in our staff. I'm completely committed to this program, but I'm not there at the counter. And I want to make sure that every one of our people understands the importance of it. We're also going to use local officials to explain the revenue impacts on local communities. And you mentioned where does money go? When 40% of the meters aren't paying, there's not a lot of money to go anywhere. So one of the things that we want our staff to understand is how their individual actions at the counter affect this program. The other thing we're doing is we're examining ways that we can better utilize independent data to tell us who shouldn't have a placard, mainly because they're dead, but also because they've moved. So to let you know, right now, we use the Department of Public Health. Every month, we check every placard against the identities of people who have passed away. We do that every month, and then we do it annually in a sweep to check it 13 times a year. And we find about 70,000 people on those death rolls. It's very easy in something this large to have 1,000 people. A placard says Andrew Michael Conway. Another placard says Andy Conway. A birth date can be transposed. There are a lot of records in the state of California that small errors cause these large computer programs to kind of miss each other. And that's how you end up with dead people on the rolls, on voter rolls, on placard rolls, is because of small variations in names. So we're talking to the tech community, we're talking to Experian, Polk, people who have experience in washing this kind of data to improve our accuracy. They think that there are about 35,000 dead people on our rolls. In a program where there are 70,000 deaths a year, over a 20-year period, that's actually pretty good when you look at how many people are on there, but we're going to make it better. The other thing that we're doing is we're conducting more local stings. You'll notice more in the news, we're trying to publish all of them. We're trying to make people aware of them. The media eats it up. It's great on a slow news day. So they are following us around, and we're trying to increase the visibility that we will catch you. That neighborhood near UCLA that was mentioned over the phone, you know, I want to know that street because I will have 5 guys out on that street next week if I can. And we will, I'm sorry? Right off the Hill Garden? Do you know Vito Scataglia? Do you know Vito Scataglia? Okay, I can put you in touch with him. He's DMV's Southern California expert on parking enforcement, on placard enforcement and sting operations. He's a great person to work with. One of his goals is to educate more local law enforcement communities about ways that you can do this. So these are just some of the things that we're doing. We're also working on SB 611 and how we can implement it because I think it's got legs. We're very excited about the idea that the legislature wants to step in and make some of the changes that I'm not allowed to make on my own. So I really want to thank you for doing this today. Just from my perspective as the operator of this program, it means a great deal to me personally because I don't like to be criticized. Who does? But I want you to know that we're committed to the program that we have, that the access it provides, but we're also committed to making it better. So thanks very much for your time.
We have heard some fantastic recommendations, some really outside of the box thinking. Thank you guys so much for your participation. I just want to remind you, if you have additional comments, you can send them to us via email at ccda@ccda.ca.gov. We would like to collect your worksheets, so if you could give those to us, we'd really appreciate it, especially want to make sure we get the table ones. So let's get the reporters so we can get their sheets from them. Please remember to fill out your evaluation forms. Again, we do endeavor to make this as accessible as possible, but we appreciate your recommendations so we can grow and become better at this. And thank you so much for your participation. I'd like to hand this off to our Outreach Commissioner, Education Outreach Chair, Betty Wilson.
Oh my goodness. The only thing I really want to add is that we are looking for, as I might have mentioned earlier, for locations around the state of California where our commission can hold meetings and events that really would lend toward education of the disability laws, as well as ADA, Title 24, all of these, because this is what's sorely lacking, not only with DMV but with our whole state. The education, understanding of what the civil rights, or the rights of people with disabilities, or the rights of people in general. You can see that from the sociology that's happening here in California. Huh? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. And then did we have some closing comments that we wanted to also hear from Michael Paravagna? Thanks.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to one and all for being here today. We are looking at ways of capturing the issues that California faces relative to access for folks with disabilities. And this, of course, is one of them. We're looking at service animals as an issue. We're looking at continuing education for folks in the building trades as an issue. We're looking for concepts about how CAST operates. We're looking for ideas from you about what other kinds of things we should explore. The thinking behind it is to bring a diverse group of people together, introduce a problem, and see whether consensus can occur. See whether ideas can be developed that we can pass on to agencies administering programs or perhaps members of the legislature. And through your thoughtful work today, I think we achieved that. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Glad you're here.
Well, I just want to say that we truly have enjoyed this opportunity to have each and every one of you. This has been a room of powerful folks. So everyone has deliberated with thoughtfulness, and we value that. We know that this is not the end. This is just the beginning of continued conversations. And we look forward to being able to share continuously. This is, as we said, this was a mini opportunity. This is not a full-fledged. We want to spend more time, but we decided through the leadership of Commissioner Lemus and Wheelie to shorten our full commission day so we can do this. But this, you can tell we needed more time, and we will when we have a full-fledged listening forum. But we want to thank you because we know you could have been doing anything outside of this time, and you came. Now I see a hand back there, and I have 30 seconds, my dear brother. 30 seconds.
Okay, that is here representing the Sacramento and everything else. I did not see him go to one table, okay, during these discussions. What you're putting up there is maybe half a minute of what was discussed. If he would have gotten into the trenches, he would have heard a lot more things that he could take back to his own people. So I think it would be a good idea when they do have representation that, you know what, they should mingle with all the people so that they can hear everything, not just what's written.
Well, I appreciate, your feedback. And the reality is we know we're going to get better and better and better as we go along. And so we appreciate, I welcome that, and we thank you for it. Again, this was a mini version, and we know that some folks we didn't get to see here will be here at the next forum when we have it in Sacramento. And we hope that we'll get even more representations from the various groups, because that's our goal. And this is beautiful. Different folks from all kinds of walks of life and experiences talking and sharing together. And it's a rare opportunity, and we thank you. We value it. So again, we thank you so much. We are very conscious of the time, and we're right on the second. So I want to thank Sacramento Collaborative Research Leadership for facilitating this. She organized this, and I appreciate it. And so she has her last wrapping to get you guys in line, okay?
And just to your comment, we did ask folks to please give us their worksheets because we want to capture as much information as possible. So your comments will be included in the summary. We also want you to please use this if you have comments such as the commissioner made or any comments, what worked, what didn't. Please fill this out. It will help us. Thank you. Thanks to the commission. Thanks to the endowment. Really appreciate your participation. Have a beautiful day.